everybody should come to this one. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be in this session, which is creating an AU Europe Center, building bridges across disciplines. Even if you're not interested in Europe, the learning objectives are effectively the good, the bad, the ugly. And this is designed for you to think about how you might look at some of the challenges and constraints and prospects and opportunities of doing these kind of initiatives. It truly reflects interdisciplinary, and I'm going to just introduce the speakers, and it shows you the range of faculty involved. To my left, I have Kimberly Cowell-Myers in SPA, and then I have Fernanda Nicola in the Washington College of Law. And then I have a special guest, which is Tim Rivera from the formerly from the European External Action Service, which is the EU Diplomatic Corps. He works on academic programs, and he does funding from everything from high school all the way to university faculty research. And he's going to give us a perspective based on other centers he's seen across the United States. I'm Michelle Egan in SIS, and I'm going to do Learning Objective 4, which is coordination across units, startup costs of building a new center with very limited resources. So my two colleagues are going to give you a sense of all of the things that we have done so far on a tiny, tiny budget.
Yes, okay, good. Let me just get it rolling. Sorry, I'm a Mac user, so this is challenging for me. I feel like my left hand is my right hand. Again, I'm Kimberly Cowell-Myers. I'm in the Department of Government in the School of Public Affairs, and I do a lot of work on Northern Ireland. And I'm going to talk primarily about my collaborations with others across campus and working on Northern Ireland in recent years. So I spent a lot of time trying to think about what I might suggest to you in terms of how to make these connections. And unfortunately, I have come up short because most of my work has grown out of a relationship I have with Carol Gallagher that goes back, neither of us can remember how long. It's at least 2, maybe 3 decades. So we've just known each other a long time, and we're aware of each other's work. And Carol and I, one of the instances of collaboration was a Maymester program that ran for 2 years. We're hoping we'll run again. But it was a joint program with Queen's University in Belfast, where half the students were from Queen's, half the students were from AU, and we swapped out. We spent half the time, about 2 weeks in one place and 2 weeks in the other. So that was a teaching specific collaboration across disciplines in which we engaged. We also did a number of events, or have so far done a number of events on campus. So we were the primary sponsors or sort of faculty leaders on a day-long symposium we ran to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. And that was a very substantial undertaking. I think it was something like $22,000 by the time it was done. And it was a partnership with Queen's University in Belfast, Ulster University, also in Belfast, the Northern Ireland Bureau, and the Irish American Network, which is the cultural outreach organization of the Irish Embassy. But we had a day of panels and speakers, many international guests, and many domestic academic figures as well. Then this year, it took a while to get it off the ground. It seems, and I'm not just talking about the session, I'm also speaking about the policy, but Brexit has provided many opportunities for interdisciplinary conversation. And we hosted in the School of Public Affairs, in conjunction with the Transatlantic Policy Center, which is Michelle's shop over in SIS, a series of 2 panels on Brexit that engage the School of Public Affairs, faculty from the School of Public Affairs, the School of International Service, the College of Arts and Sciences, COGOD, and also Washington College of Law. Fernanda was on that panel, as was Michelle, or as were Michelle and myself. And that was fantastic. We had, 100 guests. We had 2 sessions, 80 each. It was jam-packed. And it was thrilling to hear the topic talked about from so many different perspectives. These opportunities in conjunction with the next one, oh, sorry, I went too far. The next one, which was a conversation with Brendan O'Leary. Brendan is the sort of leading specialist on Northern Ireland in the US. He's Irish, though he does also have an American passport. We still consider him primarily Irish. And he agreed to come and do a session. And then afterwards, we had a VIP luncheon. But these 3 or 4 sessions that I've mentioned so far, where they were interdisciplinary, they brought people together from across the different schools, across campus, were really rich educational opportunities for our students, first and foremost. So they brought in kind of opportunities for experiential learning, internship and networking connections. They allowed students to hear from people from different backgrounds and different training and discipline, and also engaged people from outside academia to comment. In particular, the session that we ran on the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement involved people, faculty in the arts, faculty in political science, in the social sciences, in anthropology, talking about public history. I mean, there was such a variety of topics discussed. And again, providing students opportunities to learn about, topics that they care about, but from a variety of perspectives. And then I also want to sort of highlight how, and again, a sort of jam-packed session there with Brendan. Also want to highlight the fact that this interdisciplinary collaboration between Carol and myself has generated multiple op-ed opportunities. So we write for the Monkey Cage when we can. We've also written for The Conversation and a few other outlets. And then we wrote an academic paper presented at the International Studies Association in March of this past year, and now under review. So it's provided both of us intellectual opportunities and publishing opportunities. And then it's provided the university the chance to partner with organizations outside, including other academic institutions. So as mentioned, we've partnered on multiple occasions with Queen's University in Belfast, also Ulster University, the Transatlantic Policy Center, which is the Jean Monnet EU Policy Center now at SIS, again, Michelle's shop, but also the Northern Ireland Bureau here in DC, the Irish Embassy in DC, and the Irish Network DC. So kind of enhancing AU's prestige outside of our campus borders. And just for fun, I threw in a couple of images here to talk about kind of impact in the world. The picture on the left is the luncheon that we hosted after Brendan O'Leary's talk, in which we had about 25 VIPs, representatives of the Irish government, the British government, the EU, the Irish Times, the Washington Post, and former members of Congress and ambassadors and these kinds of people. And the picture on the right is a picture of Queen's University students dressed in AU bling. So they're all wearing their AU sweatshirts. They're traveling together, representing both Queen's and AU out in the world, which I thought was especially fun. Before I conclude, I wanted to mention that all of this work that we've been doing in the last couple of years really hinges on the support that we've received from the university. So I have the best dean in the whole wide world. I'm going to make you all infinitely jealous. But our dean offers an Excellence with Impact initiative that allows us to apply for funding to run events. And a number of our events have been sponsored through the Excellence with Impact initiative. And part of that is it requires a connection to classroom learning and also an opportunity to enhance the impact of the university outside of our borders. And so we work very consciously with those goals in mind when we craft these projects. And I'd also like to mention that our dean's office has been enormously helpful in providing logistical support. In particular, our events team has taken care of so many of the details of this and made hosting events much easier for us between the communications and the catering and the arranging of the media and the the coverage, the extension of our impact has been enormously enhanced by the work of our dean's office. And so some lessons, that I would offer, again, I can't help you connect with other faculty so much in the sense that much of this has grown out of the relationship I had with Carol. But we did manage to reach out through our connections individually to faculty in other schools and bring them in, and then use our connections outside to help foster institutional relationships between AU and these external actors. There are resources on campus to support these kind of initiatives. So I know when I used to do these things in years past, I was having to do all the communications and I was having to do all of the events planning. And I'm really pleased to see the AU advance itself in terms of being more prepared to make these things more seamless for our faculty and for presenters and people who might attend. So those are some of our experiences that I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kimberly. And my name is Fernanda Nicola. I teach at the Washington College of Law, which is the law school here on campus. And for those who just want to know a little bit more about law school and why we're somehow different than the rest of the campus, is that we are a graduate school and we are a professional school. And so sometimes the cooperation is harder because of these two inherent features of who we are. We have a kind of a professional commitment and limitation, but it comes from the American Bar Association, but we also run only on the graduate level. And so some cooperation, we're planning to teach a class with Michelle, we need to teach only a class together that is a graduate class. So let me, similar to Michelle, Kimberly, I want to tell you what I've been doing. And just like Kimberly, I wouldn't be able to do any of the things we're doing without the support of our institution, the Washington College of Law, which is ranked in the US News ranking 77, in the QS ranking, that is the Times Magazine ranking, which is more the UK ranking, we're ranked 51. And even more importantly, in our US News ranking, in terms of specialization, we are ranked 9, which is a huge ranking for our international and comparative specialization. We are up there with Harvard, Stanford, Michigan, Virginia, the heavyweights in Georgetown, and others. And so we are basically competing on the international level with much more muscles than on the overall ranking, which means that lots of resources historically have been poor towards our Washington College of Law to be known in the US and abroad for its well-known international and comparative specialization. And we do want to hold on to this specialization because that's what allows us to do these kinds of cooperation, because that's where funding and staff works endlessly to create these types of interactions. So I have to say that every time I am organizing events, and we organize events endlessly at the U, maybe you don't see more much here, but in any case, we have 1 million events, and these wouldn't be possible without our International and Comparative Legal Studies program, and Rachel Gordon is here from the program, and also without our special events and basically our events office that organize all these events. And being in DC, you can imagine it's really easy kind of organizing events, having amazing scholars who come by, and also having the EU institutions, the European Commission and the European Parliament Liaison Office being here in DC. There is an event coming up. You're all invited to attend. It's on Poland's anti-constitutional backslide, which is something very relevant happening as we speak, somehow countered by the European Court of Justice that is reviewing some of the decisions of the Polish government to basically impose mandatory retirement on the Supreme Court justices of the Polish Supreme Court, and you're all welcome to come.
May I just apologize? The slides looked fine on my computer, so I'm not really sure what's happening.
Okay.
But you get the one word Poland, and that's the reference to this event.
One of the key issues here has been, for instance, for this event, Michelle is a moderator, and also my colleague Bill Davis and I have been working endlessly in conferences of this type. And since 2013, we've been working on events, conferences, on especially the European Court of Justice. We published a book called EU Law Stories, and this is a picture of the robe that was designed in the 50s for the first judge of the European Court of Justice. It's really the idea of justice in robes. They had to be legitimated at least by what they were wearing, because it was a brand new court. And with Bill, we published two edited law journals. We published several law review articles, and we've been doing this research really on the role of the European Constitutional Court or supranational Constitutional Court in Luxembourg, and how that could be compared, for instance, to, let me see if I find the picture to the role of the U.S. Supreme Court. And in 2017, we organized the Luxembourg Forum, which was this event of the meeting of the European Court of Justice with the Supreme Court. And the Court of Justice contacted Bill and I and asked us if we could host the forum and the public side of the forum here at our school, while they invited Bill and myself to attend their closed meetings between the Supreme Court of the United States and the Court of Justice, where the two courts talked about things that are not public, and I cannot tell you more, but one of the hot issues that was then at the forefront and still is for instance, the big divide over the protection of data privacy, and the fact that the Europeans are very much into protecting individual dignity as opposed to protecting free speech, which is the endless feature of the US legal system, which has created a big transatlantic divide in the different types of protections of data privacy. Going now to the...
Unfortunately, they're not seeing it. We're seeing it. Does anybody have any ideas?
Oh, that's okay. Let's go back. Let me go to the next step, which is really thanks to Rachel Hunter, who's here. We ended up offering a class on EU data privacy in Brussels for our students as part of our summer abroad curriculum. And so I'm now teaching for the second time this class, which is a one-week class in Brussels for our students interested in business law and regulations. And they're really interested in the aspects of data privacy. And let me go here. This is the offering that we give them. It's 1 week in London, 1 week in Brussels, and then there's another week in Geneva. The Brussels part is the one I'm teaching, and it's really very much focusing on data privacy. And here's some pictures from last year in Brussels. So we have the teaching in our AU Center in Brussels with an alum, Mr. Kendall Thomas, I think, or I forgot what was his name, but he's an IBM lawyer who came back to talk about how IBM deals with selling and producing partly in the EU and dealing with the EU regulations. Then we had also events in law firms. We went to John's Day, so the students could see not only how this regulation works in theory, but in practice, what law firms do. And we also went to, I went somewhere else. We also went to, of course, the European Commission. We tried to find experts in the digital single market, and especially lawyers at the Parliament and at the Council and at the Commission that would deal with data privacy issues. A couple of minutes and I'm done. I have to say that as I say, the teaching offers students not only an opportunity to see on the ground what's happening, but also an opportunity to make connections and future career paths, possible internships. And for instance, here with Bill Davis, my colleague, we invited a judge of the European Court of Justice and 3 colleagues that were all talking about a book that was just published on critical legal studies going U.S. critical legal studies methodologies used in EU law. And these 2 colleagues, Tamara Peresin and Roberto Mastroianni, were 6 months later, after that they came to our EU event, they became judges at the Court of First Instance, that is the first level court at the European Court of Justice. So we have incredible opportunities for our students also to go and clerk at the European Court of Justice. We send 1 or 2 students every year. They go to Luxembourg to spend 3 months after graduation with the Dean Acheson program to do so. We have internship, we have dual degrees program in other institutions, and we do collaborate solidly with institutions in France, Italy. We're trying to strengthen our relationship with universities in Belgium. There is Gans, but we're trying to work more with Leuven and also Leuven-la-Neuve to have also a French. I think bilingualism is very important, and we also have connections with German schools in Hamburg, but having students really they are bilingual or they can speak fluently and know the legal terminology in Italian, French, Spanish, and German, it's something that we value a lot. And the last point that I want to mention is I think working in Brussels is very important for many reasons, not only because it's the site of many EU institutions, the site of power for the European community, but it's also the site where colonialism hits you bluntly. And I do think that there needs to be more interaction between American and European students, in the sense that American students have we teach a lot of critical race theory. We deal with race openly. Europeans are very much, we have no racism in Europe. You know, there are the Romas that have some issues, but look, there's no racism. And when you walk in Brussels, you see how divided the city is and how the colonial legacy is obvious. In trade agreements, there's huge colonial impact, and the racialization of Europe is so obvious to our students and is not talked enough, especially in the legal curriculum. So thank you.
That just gives you an idea of the type of range of activities. Tim is going to talk about from the funding perspective and from the programmatic perspective. And then I'm going to talk about, because it's part and parcel of the university strategic plan, the problems with funding. And I'm going to emphasize the word problems.
So yeah, first of all, thank you, Michelle, for the invitation to be here. I am the interloper, I guess, on this panel, but very happy to be here. I was, until the beginning of November, a programs manager at the EU delegation to the United States here in Washington. So because I am no longer there, I do have to stipulate that I don't now officially speak on behalf of the European Union anymore. But I thought it's important to start with the question of why the EU funds and supports centers like Michelle's and EU studies abroad, including in the US. And that's fundamentally, it's long-term cultural relations and public diplomacy work. It's understanding that if the EU wants to maintain the same type and level of close transatlantic relations that we've had for the last 70 years, we have to already be building the next generation of transatlanticists from the very beginning. So what we have done is we have created a series of programs from high school all the way through graduate study that we have tried to basically create a pipeline of students. So this starts in high school. We have a program called the Euro Challenge, which is a competition around European financial and monetary policy for high school students. We also increasingly are working with high school social studies teachers and curriculum specialists to basically identify ways that the European Union could be integrated into existing social studies curricula, because history courses, you're lucky if you get through the end of World War II in an American history course. But we feel that understanding what the EU is and how it works and its unique sort of political status on the world stage is something that it's important for people to be able to graduate high school with. We also have created it for undergraduates a competition as well, which Michelle knows very well. It's called the Schumann Challenge. It's on European foreign policy and security policy. American University was the first to win that competition back in 2017. So on the strength of their presentation. So that's a very interesting and unique opportunity for undergraduates. Likewise, undergraduates are eligible for support under Erasmus Plus, which is the EU's flagship exchange program. Universities can work with partners in Europe and elsewhere to support the mobility of students and staff. So that's an opportunity for them as well. Likewise, something that we are supporting, the EU developed 3 toolkits for Model EU. You're probably all very familiar with Model UN, but we created 3 toolkits for Model EU as well, which can be used at high school or university level. And we've seen those get picked up and even translated and used in universities in Brazil and in Korea. And then we also have our Fulbright. The EU has its own Fulbright program called Fulbright Schumann, which is the only Fulbright opportunity that allows for the study in more than one country. So you could do research in up to 3 countries abroad. But what I think is most important for our conversation today is a program called the Jean Monnet activities, which supports centers of excellence, which is what Michelle and her center has received from the European Commission. But you can also fund chairs, modules, and projects. So there's this really sort of a la carte options that you can apply for funding. And this call goes out every year. So, you know, in one year you could start with maybe just a chair and then build on that and have a center of excellence and then add to that a module or a project. And so you get a bite at that proverbial apple every year. So it really offers you opportunities to flexibly respond to the needs and demands of what what you may see coming up on your campus. But I think the new Transatlantic Policy Center that Michelle has here is a really great example of the changing nature of area studies, because I mean, AU's added value here. You've got incredibly strong connections to policy, right? Just being in Washington and given the nature of the institution here, and you brought that, I think, to the center that you have, and it is sort of the added value that you wouldn't necessarily have that other centers either in the US or abroad might be able to bring to bear. It's no surprise that events and news drives the popularity or interest in certain topics. So yes, we have seen an increase in interest in EU studies because people are fascinated either by Brexit or the Euro crisis. Area studies will always have a very strong connection to political science, economics, law, as we've heard. But increasingly, these topics are broadening. We're finding people coming to EU centers from very, very different perspectives. Some of the most successful EU centers that I have engaged with or worked with they're developing really interesting collaborations with unusual places in their institutions. Schools of education, schools of engineering, schools of communication. These collaborations they're both in response to student demands, but they also are increasingly reflecting the further multidisciplinarity of area studies. So students will often come to an EU center to learn more about the EU because their primary interest is in another topic: cultural policy, climate change, migration, human rights, emergency management, transportation policy. So they're coming into this with really different perspectives, and it creates really exciting opportunities for connections across an institution, across a university that wouldn't otherwise be made. So for me personally, I think the really exciting one is on climate change, where people see the EU taking a leadership role on climate change and they want to learn more, but in order to do so, they have to learn a little bit more about what the EU is and how it functions. So they do need that a little bit of that political science, or legal or economic background in order, in order to understand fully what that climate change policy will entail. And actually, this is something that working together with Fulbright, we have tried to do quite a bit. Traditionally, a lot of our Fulbright applicants were coming from the economics, political science, or legal communities, but we're really trying to sort of broaden that out. We were trying to broaden that out quite a bit because we've been seeing these trends. And bringing an area studies perspective into a course, for example, predominantly about climate change, allows for a deeper dive into a particular example. So it's using the EU as a case study for migration, human rights, cultural policy, etc. And over time, if that type of collaboration continues, you can create really interesting academic opportunities, like certificates in a particular, so people can actually end up with a specific or interesting qualification that they come out with that actually flags or signals to either future employers or academically that they have this unique combination of opportunities or knowledge. What's the added value for the university? I think it's multifold. It represents a great example of collaboration and innovation across the institution. It's, if you're applying for these, I think for these awards from the European Commission, it's an external recognition of excellence. For sure, we call them Jean Monnet Centers of Excellence for a reason. And here's the interesting thing, it's also about sharing resources and burdens across multiple business units. Right? Because if you're bringing two schools together to create a course, you're probably, sharing that resource burden a little more widely than you would be if it was just sitting within its own school or with its own center. So that, I think, is also an interesting aspect. The added value of this approach from the EU's perspective, from the public diplomacy perspective, is that you're widening the scope of people who at least have to know the basics of what the EU is and how it works. Because how else are you supposed to know about, the climate or transport policy? And I think that's important to keep in mind, and perhaps Michelle will go into this a bit. When applying for funding, it's important to keep the funding entity's objectives forefront in your mind. Yes, you're going to have your own objectives, but you have to think about how exactly do those align or even further the objectives of the funding organization or agency. I do have to say, though, that one of the best collaborations I've seen with EU centers is between university professors and administrators working in EU studies on the one hand, and working with secondary school or community college educators and students on the other. And what's really interesting is when they're working, especially in their own communities, it creates a potential pipeline of new students into the university and into the program, and it strengthens those links with the community. So there are a lot of different reasons that I have seen centers go to their administrators, to their hierarchy, to their provost, their dean, and say, here's yet another interesting reason why I think we should engage with this. I also want to flag very briefly that a couple of the things that I mentioned, the Schumann Challenge, Euro Challenge, Model EU, these are all really great examples of experiential learning that I think, the best way to understand the EU is by doing. It's a really complex set of institutions to get your head around. So I think providing these sorts of opportunities, especially the Model EU, is a really useful opportunity. You don't need that many, you need sort of like minimum of like 25 to 30 students to do it, and it's really worthwhile. I also think AU's experience of doing a Model G20 is quite interesting in this respect as well. Your institutions or universities most likely have relationships with at least one university in Europe. See if you can connect with a like-minded partner for engagement, even by video. We've seen a lot of interesting collaborations by video conference now, which develops and builds relationships over time. I also highly commend programming by video, webinars. The EU Center in Pittsburgh has developed an event series that's entirely online called Conversations on Europe, in which the speakers and the audience members are located anywhere and are connected through technology. They use a suite of technology called Blue Jeans, which means that you could use Skype or FaceTime or Zoom or any sort of different video conferencing platform to connect to this particular webinar. And they record them and they're available afterwards. Most universities probably have subscriptions to some type of technology like this, but I think it's a really easy and quick way to bring people together for programming that allows a lot of flexibility. I know I just sort of threw a lot at you, so I'm happy to take questions or take deeper dives into any of that.
Okay.
I'm going to focus a little bit more on the tough stuff. And one of the things that we wanted to do and apply for external funding was because we were doing all of this stuff across campus, but we didn't have an institutional home and we didn't have resources. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some challenges, a couple of internal challenges to the university. Different schools are different in the level of support that they give you for logistical events. We hosted our launch at the Finnish embassy, supported by Finland, supported by the EU, 2 ambassadors, but because it was an off-campus launch, we didn't have staff support. So I'm just saying to you, there are logistical challenges. You know, putting together a speaker series, you've still got to book rooms, and that's difficult. So think about that as you approach it. The second internal challenge is that so many people find about grants at the last minute. My rule of thumb is 2 months out, I let everybody know I'm applying for a grant. Why do I do that? If you want a course release, somebody has to sign off on it. If you want feedback, somebody has to sign off. So, thirdly, if you want a budget person to work on your grant, they have to have time. And then the last reason is the EU and a lot of US government agencies have a portal system to upload it. That actually can be very difficult. The EU can take up to a week to set up your portal so that OSP can upload those grants for you. You wait till the night before, the grant is going to crash and not be uploaded. So you really need to know and let people know about 2 months ahead of time. Even if you decide not to apply for the grant, at least your name is out there across campus that you're working in this area. Those are my internal challenges. My external challenges are the following. What about the legal wording of your contract and your fund? We got our grant July 31st. We didn't get the contract signed back and forward between the EU and the university until the first week of November. The grant started on September 1. So we were waiting to use the money and plan because it took so long for the legal wording and legal contracts. Secondly, what happens if you subcontract? I'm currently on a grant with 11 institutions, and I thank God I'm not the PI, because you need to coordinate across 11 institutions. I did host the conference here, and I actually had to write 13 visa applications for Russia, China, Hong Kong, and everywhere else. And I got 11 out of the 12 of those visas. I'm just saying to you, when you plan these things, think about what it involves. What happens if the subcontractor does not come through? Can you yank their portion of the grant? How do you deal with that? What are the consequences? Check your legal wording. And so then finally, what if you do a reporting requirement and all of a sudden the funder comes back to you and says, we want more information, can you give supplemental, we want revisions. Build that into your grant writing process, because it's inevitable that a grant agency will come back to you for clarification and more information. And then what happens if you've done a budget and then 2 years down the road, oh my goodness, I haven't spent the money, or I want to reallocate money across budgets? You have to get pre-approval. There's not a lot of grants these days that are discretionary. Most of them you have to ask for approval to move things around. What happens if you can't move it around and they say no? You have to have a plan B. You don't spend the money, you lose it. And so those are the challenges that I have anticipated. The biggest challenge is the startup costs. And this is something for you to think about. Everybody focuses on grant writing, and we got our grants. I currently have 3 that I'm involved with: PI, co-PI, and just part of a consortium. And it's great. The listserv comes around and it says, congratulations, Kimberly, Fernanda have a grant. Wonderful. And everybody always says, oh, congratulations. They send these little emails around. The biggest cost is the grant management. I feel that running these 3 grants and the activities I'm committed to feels a little bit like a 3-credit class. Nobody pays attention to the grant management side and the time that takes. Everybody praises you for getting the grant, but not for the reporting requirements and the grant management. Then there are the funding expectations. What can be included in the grant in terms of AU contributions and cost share? You have to show something. So what are you going to ask for? My teaching assistant works 5 hours a week on the grant. That is AU cost share. And it shows that we're actually contributing. You have to ask the question, what is eligible and what can you put on these grants? And then the last issue, a couple of other issues is read the RFP. The RFP for the EU has to be 100, 150 pages long. Seriously?
Just the Jean Monnet.
Just the Jean Monnet.
Well, yeah, across centers of excellence, modules, chairs, projects, yeah, you're probably looking at
150 pages RFP. Somebody has written it, and we have a colleague in SIS who writes them. I can't tell you, what is the funder asking for? There's a general perspective that, oh, I've got this project. I have to ask for money for the whole project. Split your project up and ask for different pieces from different funders. Don't always ask for everything from the funder. But when you look at that RFP, what is the thematic areas? What is the formatting? What is the weighting of different categories in the review process? I've been on so many grant bodies where it feels to me like, did you even read the RFP and the proposal? Sometimes we get kicked out. What we did is we picked up on the themes that we thought were interesting for as many faculty as possible. We all know there are challenges in the US, so we wanted to look at transatlantic challenges. So we're focusing on rule of law and democracy, integration and immigration, new issues of security, cybersecurity and data privacy, and trade and regulation. Anybody who knows anything about US politics knows all those issues are salient here as well. What it has meant is that we've had people contact us who have no interest in the EU or Europe, who want to be part of the rule of law or the immigration aspect of the project and the center. So that's been terrific. Have a clearly articulated set of goals for the duration of the grant. And you're all going to say, yeah, that's obvious. Deliverables are really, really important in how you are graded, evaluated for a grant. First thing I did when I wanted to apply for this grant is I called my colleague at Georgia Tech and I said, advice? And he just went, OMG. And I was like, what? And he said, it's a 3-year grant. I have decided to do 3 workshops across the grant and 3 edited volumes. I'm dying. That's way too many deliverables. And so I think that that's something we always want to give more. And the EU wants a big bang for its buck. But to be quite honest with you, we said we would do 4 speakers a year, 4 high profile. They already did the job for me. And so it's great because they've done the deliverables. And so one of the things that's happened is that map out the time frame of activities, who does what. And here it's the importance of collaborators. I've got a lot of good colleagues on and off campus, but there's a reason Kimberly and Fernanda are on the panel, because it's not enough for your colleague to show up at your conference and say, I've got a great quality paper. You want to talk to the colleague when Fernanda and I have done a workshop and at the very last minute somebody drops out of the panel and you're sitting there at the last minute reorganizing all of the panels. You need somebody to be on board with you. Or at the last minute, I have a conference, Fernanda shows up and I say, oh my gosh, my discussant has dropped out and I know she can do this. And that's where you know, and so when Kimberly does it, Fernanda, these are the people I want to collaborate and write grants with. And there's people, quite frankly, I don't want to collaborate and write grants with. And you have to think about metrics for project assessment. What are your metrics? Is it how many times people go on your website? how many Twitter followers you have. You have to have some metrics to report for the, so then the last two issues are reporting requirements. There is the budgetary reporting requirement that usually is done by your budget office, the separation of ethics, you spending the money, somebody else doing the reporting requirements. And then there's your narrative. So my narrative for the EU is due July the 30th. Everybody in Europe is on vacation, but I still meet that deadline. Some grants want an interim budget report or an interim narrative. And I love the EU because they send me A, a reminder, and B, they have a portal. So when I leave here today, I'm going to take all of Kimberly's slides and I'm going to upload them to the portal because they're part of my reporting requirements.
I hope they work there.
And does that make any sense? And so it's great for me because you don't want to leave it till the last minute because then you forget all the activities that you've done. So I'm credit claiming on an event that Kimberly organized and will provide her with some funding for it. And so you start seeing that you want to disseminate the resources and don't tell anybody that. And so the other issue is that in terms of the narrative, I try and do it ahead of time, and I try and get this done in July, but I love it because the portal allows me to do it ahead of time. Some funding agencies don't tell you, they just assume you remember to do it. And then the last issue, I should say, is the couple of things that I really have floored me. And every time I do a grant, this is a 3-year grant, it's not a lot of money, and they want a lot of deliverables. I don't have staff support and research support in the summer. It sucks because I've still got to arrange activities and I've still got, so you have to think that a grant is year round, not an academic calendar year. The second issue is auditing requirements. One of my grants requires an audit. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that. So I actually talked to people in OSB and research within the university, and they were like, yeah, we got auditing. I did not put that in my budget. So in some respects, I'm assuming that somewhere on the campus, they have the facilities and wherewithal and knowledge and know how to do this. But I'm worried that there'll be a cost to the university. But auditing is never anything I would think about including in my budget. And lastly is sustainability. This is a 3-year grant. You can reapply. There's no guarantee you will get it again. There were 29 centers selected globally. There were 3,500 plus applications. The other thing to realize is that some of these institutions get 4 or 5 of those grants. So they're really good at it. University of Florida must have raised, $2.5 million through these grants. And if I could be Amy Kreppel, I would. She's just fantastic, and she's figured out how to do this. And for a lot of us, the learning curve is really, really high. Do not be discouraged. I told my colleague, Garrett, who co-wrote this proposal with me, we won't win this year. We need to put our name out there. We'll win next year. And to my surprise, we won first time out. But the other thing I usually do is I'm absolutely anal about asking for feedback. So even though we won the grant, I still wrote to them and said, what feedback will you give me? Because I know that when I reapply for these grants, I need to take that into account. That's me. Thank you.
May I, you prompted a bunch of different things from on that last point, the whole part of continued institutional practice and memory from applying and reapplying for these things, it's invaluable. So many of the successful centers I have seen, they have been doing this for a while. Yes, does that give them an initial advantage? Perhaps, yes. But if you, again, put your name out there and put some quality proposals forward, that upfront investment will eventually pay off. But then once you have it, you have to try and keep it and maintain it. So you can't just sort of stop after 3 years. You have to keep that sustainable.
And you need to diversify the funding. I mean, that's the thing that we're looking for now is working with SIS research, OSP, and I'm thinking to myself, where can I get additional money? Because if you're totally reliant on one funding source, it's a real problem. Having said that, you know, if you're in an area that's a hot area, there's money. But if you're in Europe, there's not a lot of money.
I would also emphasize in terms of planning in advance for grant writing, for a lot of public institutions, if you're applying for funding from the US government or from the European Union, 9 times out of 10, all of the templates, all of the sort of contract templates, reporting templates, guidance, all of that is going to be online and you can see it before you apply. So not only should you as the PI look at that, but you should also send it and flag it to your Office of Sponsored Research or Sponsored Projects and say, hey guys, do you see any red flags in this before we go into, you know, so that you can avoid or minimize that July 31st notification you got the grant and first week of November actually signing. Now in the EU's case, they actually let you make the contract retroactive back to September 1st, but no university in their right mind is going to let you spend money on the hope that you're going to have a contract signed. You know, but so that is one admitted flaw in the EU system there.
Yeah.
We owe her money for the very project she's been doing. We've been waiting for the funding to be signed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just two other very quick things. I think the reporting as you go that you mentioned, Michelle, is an absolutely brilliant idea, and it's a really great thing to, as soon as you have an event, write, you know, or some sort of activity, write a couple paragraphs that you can then sort of store away for later when you actually need to pull it out for your narrative report. It's better to do it fresh, and it means that you're reporting when you get to that July 15th, you know, July 15th, and you're 2 weeks away from your deadline, reporting is going to be a hell of a lot easier for you. When you are applying the, you know, when you're writing your application, look at the objectives, you know, the words that you need to be looking for when you're scrolling through those 150 pages of RFP are objectives and criteria. What are the objectives of that funding program? And what are the criteria by which your application is going to be judged? Everything else is largely procedural. But those are the two main things that you need to look for in terms of what your, you know, what is going to shape your particular proposal. What are people like me who are program managers who are evaluating these things looking for? Sharp prose, value for money, innovative ideas, and a clear narrative. You know, just the narrative of how does your project fit into the overall narrative of this funding program, and how does it stand on its own as a narrative over the course of, you know, a 3-year period.
We're open up to all of these activities. We hope you join all of these activities. Please bear in mind there were 75 people at least at the event that Kim sponsored, and you know, so the turnout was huge.
For the Brendan O'Leary thing, yeah, and equally more so for the Brexit panel we did, yeah.
And I hope to see many at the Polish.
Yeah.
Yes. You were talking about
That's enough.
maybe more multidisciplinary approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any public health and health policy center that you know of? Is public health and health policy a growing area?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of one, but I think that that's actually a really great example of where you could develop some really interesting collaborations is on, you know, approaches to public health and health policy. To my knowledge, there isn't an EU center in the US that is working on that.
I'm thinking about coverage for refugees and migrants, and then, you know, social insurance policies and lessons from US healthcare policy versus EU healthcare policy.
To my knowledge, that has not been an area of focus, and I think this, and that's the thing, is that all of this is happening slowly yet quickly, because institutionally these things take a while to really solidify. So this is where I've seen you know, examples already on climate change and on cultural policy. Some on sort of immigration, have not seen very much done at all on health or, you know, comparative public health policy. which I think is increasingly salient, you know, both with Brexit and, you know, a lot of narratives about, you know, what will happen to the NHS in a US-UK free trade agreement, you know, the debate on healthcare here in the United States, the European models of healthcare are, you know, first and foremost in people's minds among alternatives. So I think there's a really interesting debate to be had there. While I have this in my mind, I also want to flag the last comment you made about colonialism and racism. That is where, you know, politically speaking, long term, I would love to see more dialogue, because you're absolutely right that in Europe there's a recognition that conversations on race and ethnicity are way more advanced here in the United States, and that Europe is not, both as a result of history, the French sort of notion of laïcité, that there are
the colonies are outside Europe, they're not inside.
Exactly, and yet through migration, I mean, it's a fact of life. And so that's where I think there's another really interesting scope for transatlantic collaboration, and frankly, where you get to a lot of young Americans who would otherwise think of Europe as old dead white men.
Correct.
You know, and so that's where I had, when I was at the EU delegation, I was trying to push discussions going forward in that direction, and I think there's huge scope to increase that.
Your public health is two things, is that, you know, you have a lot of multi-authors, and if I was looking at 3 centers on this campus, I would look at the Accountability Center of Jonathan Fox, I would look at Hirschberg's Latin American Latino Studies, and I would look the one Kim Blankenship set up with Public Health, Risk, and Society. I think they're the 3 models for this campus. Unfortunately, they're social science, but the comment that I would raise to you is there are other places beyond the EU for comparative public health. I know that CNRS in France has funded a lot on comparative public health policy, comparative welfare, and they've used both American scholars and French scholars, and they ran that massive grant through Montpellier. And so there are those, you know, the other issue is that these grants, you know, you can also chop up these grants. So a center of excellence wants everything: teaching, research, outreach, public engagement. And the question is whether you really want to do that. If you're focused on only your research and that's what floats your boat, this is public goods. If you are only focused on your research and that's what you want, then my sense is it's a fellowship that you have to go for. Does that make sense? And, you know, my colleague right now is doing public health in Lyon. Marie, yeah. And so she's doing public health in Lyon, and so she's done hers that way. So, you know, you have to also make a choice. I always say this, there's a difference between doing an institutional grant, which is public goods and all this value added for students and multiple colleagues, versus an individual scholarship or an individual fellowship. And, you know, they're harder. You know, that's why the Schumann, I think, you know, both ways is very, very important. And the other way we don't think about is I brought a colleague over from Portugal on a Fulbright to SIS because we wanted to collaborate. You know, and there's no cost to the university, but I get my collaborator in-house. And so there are multiple ways of thinking about these things.
And I did the same with an Italian scholar, just came for a week at his own expense, but because we have a collaboration with Louis. And I just wanted to add one more thing, which you guys mentioned, but our students at the EU are particularly positioned to be not only like of immigration background. So we have lots of people, lots of students with dual citizenship. They really have Irish, European, etc., or even colonial backgrounds. And they speak French. So I have lots of students from Haiti, Martinique, with the passport, Dominican Republic, they would try to send in Italy for immigration issues. But so the students have been super active in being mobilized for these things. They're very entrepreneurial. I've learned a lot from them. They created on the law school a European Law Association that takes initiatives, takes advantage of this internship. I place one of them at the European Parliament in its own office every semester. Wish I could do more at the delegation. But I do think we are particularly placed in an era where we have these students who are so eager to know more about Europe, to know to learn from us, and also come back from their experience of dual degrees with learn experience that they're going to share with the other students here on campus. And I wish there was more even a way to integrate them more in our grants and in our teaching.
And we do have in our grant a scholarship program, and we've just given our first 2 scholarships. One student will do the transcontinental EU Nairobi, EU Kenya program, and we have another student who's going to Brussels. You know, the amount of money we can do, my goal would be to say to the alumni and say, we got this money, can you match it? So then we can send 4 students, you know, and one of our students has never left the United States and is going for the first time abroad. And that's the foundational thing that is really important. And, you know, so are we doing, you know, we'll do research, we'll continue to do research. There was nothing more frustrating than finding out that your colleague had this wonderful constitutional lawyer who's being sued for libel in Poland for his book. And we didn't know about the event till after the event. So the goal is to try to bring people together. Right. We had a little piece in the AU News, and honestly, my inbox has been filling up with former alumni and students who want to get involved and be on the mailing list. And somebody said, I had a PhD from 1965 from SIS. I'd like to be involved. And I'm thinking, oh, how can we? So my job and my strategy now, and I don't know how to figure this out, how can I leverage alums? How can I leverage alums either, you know, and I don't just mean financial support. How can I leverage alums to what we're doing? And so
our ambassador to Finland, who we invited at the launch of the Center of Excellence, he couldn't come, but is the U.S. ambassador to Finland, and he would have come except from the day. But we could do that in advance and more strategically, knowing who are our alums who are in strategic places.
And that's that problem then leads us to step on the fact that you have development offices here. So I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but let's be frank with you, all of the students who go and study abroad in Brussels or in the Maymester program in Northern Ireland, who do they remember? They don't remember the development officer, no disrespect, right. They remember Kimberly. And so, you know, the question is how do we use our faculty to engage alums and to bring in what we're trying to do?
And this also sounds to me like it's, you mentioned that all of this work and these collaborations were taking place, but having that institutional presence through a center and through a grant is what all of a sudden now, you know, the institutional hierarchy finally says, oh, okay, now like it brings together the other resources of the university, the core resources, whether it's development office or OSP or a provost office or something, it provides that formal recognition of the informal collaborations that tend to take place. And so, you know, it's one of the side benefits, I think, of having a center or having a grant, but then it's something that you need to sort of be able to formally recognize and then leverage.
Yeah, because it makes it more sustainable, so they're not just one-offs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the worst thing that can happen is 2 different people on campus applying for the same grant.
Yes.
And I've experienced that as well. And you're killing one another. You know, because you're putting time and effort into it. And, you know, so now, you know, you are told about this, but, you know, if I'm doing this 2 months out, I've already started writing my grant. That's why I'm saying to you, you need to notify people 2 months out to make sure somebody else is not applying for the same grant on campus. Any questions, comments?
I came to AU from the University of Florida, and I was in the School of Forest Resources and Conservation, and
at the time. And anyway, I just mentioned that because they have this huge infrastructure around grant application, and that sort of thing would never happen because you have to get approval through a grant officer on campus.
To apply
like, okay, there's this USDA grant. And I'm just wondering, is that a direction AU
No,
is headed
we
in?
do it. We do
Okay,
do it.
but
We do
somehow
do it,
still-
but if you're thinking and you get the call for proposals 3 months out, right? And you start getting together a team and talking to people, you may not know, that I may be doing something on comparative welfare states, and I may not know somebody's interested in public health. That's where, even though we're smaller than University of Florida, it's honestly, I've had 6 or 7 faculty approach us about the center and who do immigration or they do climate. They don't necessarily do Europe, but they're kind of engaged and interested. Yes, there is coordination on the campus, but once you start doing that grant, it's finding out who else is interested on campus, and then a lot of things have one submission, so an OSP will choose which one. But I don't want to be half writing a grant and then find mine's not picked. I'm like anybody else.
For reference, the Jean Monnet grants or the Erasmus Plus grants that Michelle's been applying for, they do come out with regularity before the end of October, and they are always due by the end of February. So they do give you a good solid 4 months. And I mean, it's predictable, so the call is going to come, is coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So you could, in theory, already start working with people before the call comes out. I know that's not, ideal, but for these types of programs where there are annual calls, there is you yourself are the ones responsible for that planning timeline.
Yeah, and they will ask you, what other grants do you have? So, we're pretty, I'm amazed at some of my colleagues. Leuven has 5 of these, but it's 5 different faculty, so,
And they're not 5 centers. It might be
They're
a
not 5.
module, a chair, a center of excellence, a
yeah,
project.
so they've distributed, but I wonder how they're able to do that, because I just, seriously, and same at Carleton, Canada. If you're going for that many from the same funding source, is there a chance that if they look at it and say, well, these 2 are good and these 3 are not, you're also, I worry about hurting my colleagues.
Right.
And one thing, there's a little cost benefit that, especially if you're teaching a law school, you don't have many Jean Monnet grants from law school. I mean, a colleague got it at BU, Daniela Caruso, but I didn't hear of many that had it because we have the ABA compliance, but also because the number of hours that they require you to teach, is very high, and it works better for the undergrad than the graduate. So the question is, there's a big pile of money that goes into European funding with the European Research Council, the ERC grants. There are over €1 million, and but my understanding is we cannot apply from the U.S.
No, yeah. So that's the thing is that also for foreign government institutions, a lot of times,
Could we apply though if we have a partner in Europe? We are,
for
or like
ERC
we have an AU center in Belgium, like we have an AU center structure in Belgium where we have faculty. Could we apply from there?
Probably, yes. So, and it's all very much about where the legal entity sits. So if you have a legal entity within, then that I think is the defining factor. So if your university has a branch or a campus, even if it's for study abroad purposes, but in principle it has a legal entity, that's where I think the most important thing is. But you still have to, that legal entity still has to remain compliant with everything else, required from that grant. So a lot of times we get a lot of questions because the EU funds a massive amount of research, and innovation. A lot of times what's required, if in most cases, US institutions can be affiliated but not necessarily receive direct funding, with a couple of exceptions. So I think with some Horizon 2020 grants, which is the sort of EU's flagship research and innovation program, some US institutions have received funding. With ERC funds, I'm not entirely sure. Within the European Union, we have this split between research and innovation funding, which is a whole other set of the House, which I didn't get involved in, and sort of these funding EU studies and funding mobility, which is what I was, that's the Erasmus program, which is what I was primarily responsible for.
And for sciences, they fund an awful lot, but it's a separate, so you may find yourself falling on the science elm. I have to say, though, I will never, I'm sorry, but I would never be a PI for one of these multi-institutional grants. My hair would go white. And you end up hiring a full-time budget person, and it's a lot of logistics and a lot of coordination. I went in with one a few years ago with the premier Italian think tank, the German Marshall Fund, 6 think tanks, Chatham House, IAI, the top think tanks in some Europe and the United States. And, people drag their feet. When you're a think tank, and I'm also at a think tank, we're constantly raising money. And if you've got 5, 6 grants and juggling balls, we used to be calling them all the time. Can you prioritize this? Because we've got to have this field survey done. And so, choosing your partners, when you have a 13, 18 institution grant, you don't know anybody. When I was writing the visa applications, I was like, well, they look like good universities, but I didn't know half the people that were in the network. It's a great way of learning a new network, but on the other hand, it can have its downfalls as well. It can have some downsides. Told you I'd do the negative, sorry.
All right.
Any last questions? I hope you're all going to apply for different grants. What we'd like to do is more sustainable. My other grant, we're actually registering as a nonprofit. So that's something else to consider. We have a very small startup grant, and we are trying to register it in Stockholm because my counterpart is in Stockholm as a nonprofit. And we really, that's a complete, that has no student experiential focus, but I'm not sure how much I want to go down that road because that's a very different fundraising ballgame. So I hope this gives you some
I could
options.
ask a question, I guess.
Sorry?
I'm a PhD student here, and I have been looking for opportunities to do like a semester of research in, hopefully in Lund, Sweden.
Where?
And
Lund,
Sweden.
Sweden.
yeah, and just a lot of the research on climate change, all the really cool ideas I'm always finding that are coming from Lund. And but the challenge is the problem statement, because as a PhD student, I am discovering a whole new world of beautiful ideas and ideas that I would like to synthesize in my dissertation. But so on the one hand, it feels like I need to have a research proposal, and that I can do, but it also feels a little disingenuous because I'm really going there to learn and to shape my ideas at this stage in my career. So I'm wondering if you all know of opportunities that perhaps from within a program trying to accomplish that sort of learning objective.
Christine Gettings is with the School of International Services graduate student program in exchange, and I would think if you were not going on a particular research-based scholarship, it would be study abroad in effect.
I would
Or
say
direct
that
enroll.
if you're applying for like a Fulbright, there's the Office of Merit Awards and Scholarships here, which work with you on developing a proposal, and they give you feedback continuously, and we're pretty good about getting like a Fulbright. I would say that you're writing a proposal to be funded. I've just been on SSHRC, Chateaubriand, and 4 others this year, and they're all for doctoral or postdocs. And, they're interdisciplinary. So, I come at this and I'm sitting there with a geographer or a lawyer, and we read these proposals very differently, so you have to be aware of that. And I also think that, if you go too early, is that really a smart move? I would say that you're looking for something like, depending on where you are, I think you're looking for something like the Council of European Studies does pre-dissertation grants. And I would say that's what you want to go somewhere that will send you for a month, 6 weeks. So you set up your relationships, you set up your connections, and you think about, well, when I apply for a Fulbright or a bigger grant,
Yeah.
I've already got boots on the ground, so to speak. So I think pre-dissertation grants are really good because it could also kick out your project. I mean, I went for one project, and when I hit the ground after my pre-dissertation, I was like, heck no. And so that's also part of the process is dealing with the kinks. And, you know, you could
What was the
ask
funding body that you mentioned?
Council of
Yes.
European Studies. And the other option is to, you know, if you have a very, very
Yes.
nice PhD director
I
or
do.
PhD that you work for a particular faculty member, and just say you wanted to go to Stockholm or Sweden, and I happen to be doing research on Sweden, well, maybe I would want you on the ground as my TA or RA. And then you would be getting your stipend there, but you might be able to do research for me long distance. You know, there are a lot of different things that you need to think about. If you go too early on a dissertation proposal, you could spend all your time, well, this proposal's not working, and now I've got to, you know, I'm losing time.
What about like this process, it's like climate models, international assessments, and, you know.
Yeah, and that's where Office of Merit Awards really, really, really will help you. They're the ones that will, you know, and then the other thing that if you speak to Anne Cantel in SIS, she's just done climate change and everything you're doing, and she's applying for a lot of postdocs. I can't tell you how many email postdocs I have sent to her in climate change, environment, sustainability all over Europe. So there's a lot in the postdoc area.
Thank you all so very much.
Thank you.